Hi guys, I'm Isabella and I'm the Membership Outreach and Communications Lead here at the Songwriters Association of Canada. And here with me is Stephen Fearing.
Hi Isabella.
And hello.
Hello.
So I'm going to do a quick introduction of Stephen Fearing. So born in Vancouver,
Yeah.
raised in Dublin.
Yeah.
Stephen Fearing has been named one of Canada's finest singer-songwriters. With a mesmerizing blend of roots, folk, and pop, he cultivated a national and international audience for his music, building it old school through countless performances at intimate venues, concert halls, and festivals of all sizes, including major events like the Reading Festival, Shrewsbury Folk Festival,
yes.
and WOMAD. And in 1996, he co-founded Canadian supergroup Blackie and the Rodeo Kings with Colin Linden and Tom Wilson. More than 22 years later, and with 9 albums to their credit, the band has become one of the most respected names in North American roots rock. And Fearing also released 2 albums and toured as one half of the duo Fearing and White with fellow Irish son Andy White.
Yeah.
So that's not a small resume. That's a whole lot of stuff. Okay, well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure. Thanks for doing
really
this.
Appreciate it. And to start, we're gonna start asking some questions, and then if you have any questions, please make sure to send them in. I'm gonna be looking at them, and we'll ask them at the end.
Sounds
Perfect. Okay, so Stephen, what inspires you to create music?
good. Oh God, jumping right into the deep end.
Right?
I don't know if I can even really answer that because I sort of think back to when I started. A love of other music, starting out by playing other people's songs, and then at some point feeling like I had to write my own. Now, why I ever thought that, I don't know. I just knew that I wanted to do this for a living. I wanted to do this for my life, and I felt like I had to write my own songs. So it's something I've never really questioned. It just was always there. This is what you have to do. I don't know if that's something that my generation was brought up with, a certain kind of artistic thing that you want to be a singer-songwriter. I was always drawn to that. I mean, I was a teenager during the punk era, and in Ireland, it was pretty strong amongst my friends in school. So there was that sort of DIY, do-it-yourself ethic around that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I can really
Well, you did. So that's good. So the second question is also about songwriting.
Okay.
So do you have a process to songwriting or when creating music?
It's always evolving, which is kind of neat. You know, I teach songwriting workshops and stuff like that, and people ask a lot about that. Is there sort of a start here and do this? But it changes fairly frequently. I spent a significant amount of my time when I was in my early days thinking about lyric first and being more lyric driven, and then realized that for me anyway, the most important part is really melody, and that's what people seem to remember. And in some ways melody is more instinctive for me than lyric. So I tend to start with a melodic idea now, but it changes, you know. Sometimes it's a snippet of conversation you hear. So once I've got ideas, I will then usually, again, this changes as well because as I got older, I got a 14-year-old daughter. My time is tiny to spend doing stuff like this. I mean, all the other things that I do, it's almost like writing songs is like a pleasant break from social media and driving cars and flying and all the other business. So I tend to basically hole up if I can for a week or a couple of days and write a batch of songs. And sometimes it's based on little things that I've written down, and sometimes I start with nothing and I just play my guitar and songs come out.
That's good.
It is.
That's
I know,
easy.
it's still kind of miraculous to me.
Awesome. Well, and how did you start as a creator in the industry? So how did that begin, like, within the industry? I mean, you said you were always drawn into doing it as a profession, but how was that start?
I started, I think, like a lot of people, playing local restaurants and cafes and things like that. Playing, I remember this one restaurant. I lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota for a couple of years after I left high school in Ireland. And that's where I really started, and I played at this little restaurant called Malt Shop. And I would do Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, 4 sets a night, 45 on, 15 off, and I just learned as many songs as I could. And so it was a time of just kind of ingesting material and then performing it, and then at some point you start trying to create your own. So it was really as a I don't know if I ever really thought this is how I'm going to make my living. I just found myself doing it more and more. So it started that way, and then gradually you start writing, and then you start learning about all the different aspects of doing this as a profession. You know, there's so many different aspects to it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not like as fun and easy as it sounds. There's a lot of hardship to it too.
In some ways, the fun part, and it's taken me years to realize this, but the work itself is the reward, which seems counterintuitive. You know, you think, well, you do the work and then you get paid, and that's the reward. But no,
Yeah.
the reward is the doing the work. If you can afford to keep writing songs and performing and make your living from that, then that's it. That's the reward. So it's taken me a long time to realize that.
Yeah. Okay, well, and how has your music evolved since you first started, became like a recording or performing artist? Or
I think it's gotten better. I mean, honestly, it is something that, it's a beautiful thing about writing songs is you can literally spend your whole life doing them. It's like chess or you're one of those, it goes on and on and on. And so I think my songs have gotten simpler. I think they've gotten more compact. Tighter in some ways. Hopefully they sound less complicated, less thought out than earlier stuff. Some of my earlier songs were very wordy, and the forms were really weird. They were overly long, and I mean, I still write long songs, but I never really mastered the 3-minute pop song. But I'm trying to simplify what I write, and hopefully in doing so make them more memorable to people. That's what I want people to remember them, that's the whole point.
Yeah, just always think about them.
Yeah,
for sure. And do you write for other recording and performing artists, or have you
not
always
particularly.
done it just for yourself?
I've written with other artists for their projects. So later today I'm going to do this thing called 4 Chords and the Truth at the Dakota, and it's a songwriter in the round, and one of my friends is going to be there, and she and I worked on an album together, Susie Vinnick. So we're anyway. It's I write for other people, but I don't sort of sit down and pitch songs at other artists. It's like I might work with another artist on something if I'm working on a song with them for them. Or sometimes, if I'm lucky, other artists will take a song of mine and put it out. But mostly I end up writing for me or for the bands I'm involved in, the Rodeo Kings, Fearing and White, that kind of thing.
So collaborating is a really big part of what you do, is that for sure?
Yeah. It's funny, when I started, my manager, Bernie Finkelstein, Bernie's been involved in the Canadian music industry. Like, he's one of the sort of founding fathers in some way. He started True North Records, which at the time was, I think, the only, if not the only, one of the only independent record labels in North America. And he started it, and so Bernie, I was lucky enough to work with him for 14 years. It's really real honor to work with somebody who's kind of from that beginning of the industry. And he was really adamant that I focus on just me, keep it simple, don't complicate things by working with other artists or trying to start other side projects. But now it's kind of the opposite. It's almost like the more diverse you can be, the better. And I've always, I think like most artists, I'm fascinated with multiple genres of music. Sometimes I can kind of find my way into it without it being too awkward to fit, and sometimes not. But in working with other artists, you get to pick their brain as well as your own, and the collaborative process is huge for me. but it took me a while to figure that out. So the more work I can do with other artists, the happier I am. It just keeps feeding my own creativity. Because otherwise, you just sit there staring at your own navel, and it's dull.
Yeah, I imagine it can get a little boring.
Oh, so boring.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so do you tend to write for one genre, or do you find your music crosses genre lines? Well, we talk, like, we write mostly folk.
Yeah.
But folk rock, like, what is...
Yeah, what is folk? I mean, I never think of it as being that I am a folk artist. I mean, certainly I'd have to be an idiot not to realize that that's the bin I get put in. But I don't think of it that way. I grew up in Ireland during the punk era. I play an acoustic guitar that does tend to lead you into a certain sound of music, a style of music, but outside of that, I try not to put too many parameters on myself, which again, is from a marketing aspect isn't the greatest thing. It'd be much better if I could just walk down one narrow track and hit it hard, but I'm too interested in other things. And if I feel strongly moved by a genre of music or a style of music or an image or sound, and I can put the hat on without it being too awkward, then yeah, sure, whatever.
Great. And changing gears a little bit, different from the songwriting process, but have you faced any major economic, social, or political hurdles as a music creator? Which I think it's,
Where do you want to start? Yeah. It's, I mean, I'm not going to whine about it. I love what I do. I feel very lucky to do what I do, but it's not easy. Having said that, I don't think anybody's life is particularly easy right now. I mean, there was a time where you could say, okay, I'm not going to be an artist because being an artist is such a gamble, it's risky. I'm going to go work at Stelco. I'm going to work at the steel mill because that's a guaranteed gig. Well, there's nothing guaranteed anymore. So it's ironic, but being an artist in some ways is kind of equipped me well for the situation that most people are finding themselves in right now, which is technology is changing everything. People's lifestyles are changing dramatically, and artists, we've had to be on our toes, and we've had to figure out how to make it work, how to make a living, how to get from A to B, what to do when your luggage gets lost, all these that very small little problems that occur all the time when you're a touring working artist. And so I think it does give you a certain toolbox for dealing with life, and serves you well. But yeah, early days, I mean, it's sometimes you just think, how am I gonna get through it? And honestly, to be 55 years old and still thinking, how am I gonna pay my mortgage next month? It can wear you down, but
very tough.
You make your bed.
Yeah.
Lie down in it. Don't complain.
Well, it's like the Jim Carrey story, right? Like he talks about his dad, how his dad wanted to be a comedian and settled for a bank job because it was the easy thing to do and more certain. And then when they were like all little kids, his dad lost his job and he lost everything. And he said, well, why am I going to go for a bank job? That's not certain either. So
yeah, it's the way it is right now. I mean, with artificial intelligence on the way, self-driving cars on the way, everybody's got to be looking ahead. It's not that far down the road. 5 years, 10 years, and think, do I really want to train myself as an auto body repair person? Do I really want to be a truck driver? Because those jobs ain't gonna be around. So, and that's massive. But in the arts, we've been dealing with sort of catastrophic change, if that's not too dramatic a term, but big change like that for years. I mean, our industry fell apart 10 years ago, like completely. And it's, we were talking about Spotify and all that stuff. That kind of seismic shift, when it happens in your industry, it pretty quickly sorts out the sheep from the goats, if you will. Those that are going to survive, and those that aren't disappear really fast.
Yeah. Well, and going back to your style, so did you have, well, not really style, but other people influencing you, but did you have any musical influences who have influenced your style, or give you a nod whenever possible, some sort of a mentor figure when you were writing?
I mean,
and even navigating those issues that we talked about, like as being a musician.
I think, I mean, certainly I could point to certain musicians like John Martin. He's this Scottish-British singer-songwriter who's a huge influence on me. My mother's record collection, church. Growing up as a kid in Ireland, I ended up going to being raised as a Presbyterian. Not that it means really very much to me now, but probably the most influence that ever had on me was the music. So hymns, the way that chord progressions work in hymns has definitely influenced me. I think because I was born in Vancouver, but I grew up in Ireland, and then I moved to the States, and my life seems to be defined by moving and change and travel, which is a pretty good setup to be a singer-songwriter. But in that way, I don't have a strong root like somebody who, was born in New Brunswick and raised in New Brunswick, or PEI, or, where you sort of think of provinces, places that have a really strong traditional musical root. I don't have that. And in some ways it's a curse, and in some ways it's a blessing. I don't have something that I can turn around and lean on when I run out of ideas, but at the same time, I'm not hemmed in. So my influences have been the places that I've lived in my life, the people that have really been kind of champions for me, like Bernie Finkelstein, as somebody who picked me up at a pretty young point in my career. Certainly I was starting to emerge, but he sort of said, okay, come with me. And he signed me to True North and signed me to a management deal, and for 14 years we worked side by side. Bernie thought that he could get me into headlining at Massey Hall within a couple of years, because Bernie worked with Coburn, and he worked with Murray McLaughlin, and he worked with Dan Hill and Rough Trade, and all these headliner acts. So we never quite made it to Massey Hall, but what he did do was he gave me an audience right across Canada, which again, in light of how the industry has changed and the fact that live music is really the only way to make a living, that's probably the best gift that a manager could ever give an artist is, this is your future, is live touring. So I could list people like Bernie, but it would be very long list.
Yeah. Okay. Well, talking about lists, if there were any other music creators that you could collaborate with, who would make that list?
Oh, Dan Lanois. I mean, I've had the luck of working with Bob Lanois, Dan's brother, over the years, off and on as a photographer. Sometimes we just been working on a live recording at a venue that he runs in Hamilton called Mule Spinner. But his brother Dan is somebody I've admired for years. Just the fact that Dan Lanois made he made so many iconic records in this very short period of time for so many different artists, and these records are all distinctly different. I think it was in a year period that he made So with Peter Gabriel, Wrecking Ball with Emmylou Harris. He made your listeners or people watching will go. But yeah, I mean, he's a brilliant artist. So that's one person. So many people, really. The person I want to work with next is the person who's going to challenge me, the person who's going to understand what I do and celebrate it, and then say, can we make that work with this idea? That's who I want to work with next.
That sounds good. And then going back to when you were learning your craft, well, you did talk about how it just came naturally to you, but did you have some sort of formal music education, or was it more informal?
It was a mixture of both. My parents, my mother especially, I mean, family is such a strong influence. In some ways I often forget in interviews to talk about my family, but my mother and my sisters, who raised me primarily, huge influences. My sister Jane, when I was in my late teens, came back to Ireland, where I was still going to school, with a copy of an album called Hobo's Taunt by Willie P. Bennett. And Willie P. Bennett was the reason that we started Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. So that album started a huge chapter of my life. At the time I was 16, 17 years old. I had no idea what kind of an impact that album would make. But my mother was disgusted when I quit piano lessons, because she's a trained soprano and sight reads, and I didn't want to play piano. I didn't like the discipline of it, but when I came across a guitar, God, I wanted to play that so badly, and I asked her for lessons, and she refused, and she was very clever by saying no. It made me want it more. And she said, well, I will give you lessons if you basically she said, you've got to stick to it. So I ended up taking classical guitar lessons for a couple of, a year, 2 years in my last couple of years in high school. And that really kind of set me on a course. But so my family, in some ways, I've thought of myself as being a bit of a black sheep and an outlier musically, but not at all. I'm totally in the family tradition. There's been vaudeville singers in my family.
Oh, wow.
My grandmother, who I never met, played keyboards in silent movies. It goes on and on, back generations. So I'm just totally in the family business, and it not necessarily classical or contemporary music, a mixture of both. So yeah, it's bred into me, it's in my blood. I couldn't get outside of it if I tried.
So definitely just happened naturally,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to fight it that hard.
No, although of course when you're a teenager you think that you're being rebellious and you're doing something that your family doesn't do. Because I thought of my parents as being classically trained, so
Mm-hmm.
by what I was doing was such a leap, but it wasn't at all. I never did learn how to read or write music, and I still kind of regret that. I know it's not too late, but chances are pretty slim at this point.
And so for upcoming songwriters and music creators, do you have any advice for those people that are looking to break further into the creative scene and make a living out of it, or even just to become better music creators?
It's tempting to not do your homework, not go backwards, because there's so much happening that's very immediate. I read an interview with Quincy Jones, and I figure if anybody's opinion on this kind of thing is valid, his is pretty valid. As somebody who's been in the business for years, who's steeped in black music, and he was being asked about modern hip-hop artists and producers, and he was really, really scornful, and I was surprised. But he said what he hears so often is people who have not paid attention to what came before. And I think that no matter where you come from, because sometimes you think, well, what is the relevance for me of a history of whatever genre of music you want to look at when you live in Toronto, or when you live in places that seem so far away. For me as a kid growing up in Ireland, Americana and North American roots music, country music, blues music, jazz, it just seemed so far away. I couldn't figure out what the relevance for me was. But you start to trace your way into it by saying, well, what music are you drawn to? I remember watching bands like Slade and Sweet and all these sort of glam rock bands that were happening, and then a couple of years later, punk music. And you start to understand that the root of what they're doing is blues and is rock music that stems from blues. And so go into it and find where it comes from. And the worst thing that I think you can do is, and it was a good piece of advice I got, is if you're a guitar player, don't listen to guitar players, go listen to pianists. Miles Davis, one of the greatest jazz trumpet players of all time, he was really influenced by Frank Sinatra, the singer. And you think Miles Davis wasn't particularly fond of white people, but he openly would say, yeah, Sinatra was a huge influence. So just listen, and then continue to listen. And then when you think you've listened enough, just keep listening, because it never ends. And the more it's about the work and less about the fame and less about the recognition and less about everything else is peripheral, and it doesn't matter, and it will all vanish so quickly, but it's the creating itself that is the beginning and the end of the whole thing.
That's really good.
Lots of hand
There you
gestures.
go. Awesome. And now going back to your memories, what is your fondest musical memory from a favorite piece of music that you've written? So if there's a memory related to something that you've written.
I don't know. One of my fondest musical memories is going to see a concert by Stefan Grappelli when I was a young kid, and I still can't figure out why I went, but I did go, and I got to see this amazing jazz violinist. But I know that's not what you're asking me.
No, that's
you're
okay.
asking me about my own stuff. I don't know, it changes. I mean, the idea that you could write something, and in writing it, there is an element of writing which is magical and emotional, and the muse comes in, and I look back on songs that I've written, and sometimes I scratch my head and I go, I don't really know how I got there, but I did. I do remember sitting there with pieces of paper and erasers and pencils, and I remember the actual work, the kind of mind-numbing, grinding work of going, what rhymes with, and if I find that word, is that the right word? And just the sort of the jigsaw puzzle of writing. That I remember, but the inspiration and the kind of a magical thing which links this metaphor with this metaphor and gives you an image that is really potent. I don't really know how that happens. And yet when you do join the dots in a certain way and you play it for people and they are moved to tears or to laughter or to say, I listened to this song when I was going in for an MRI or, and you think, wow.
Yeah, the impact that it has.
I mean, that's, to me, it's hard to pinpoint one song or another, but every now and then you get lucky and you manage to string together this sounds and words and images in such a way that it really connects with somebody, and when that happens, it's superb.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is that like music can be the soundtrack to someone's life, and if you can affect someone that intensely, I would think that's kind of the main goal, right?
Well, I always tell when I'm teaching, I always tell students, music is the only art form that has the word muse in it. There's something about the human voice, which is the primary instrument, and songwriters, I always feel like we have a special, there's a special check beside our name when it comes to the arts, because what we do is we write for this instrument, and it's the one instrument that everybody has, whether you use it to sing or not. Even when you're talking, everybody uses their voice, and we write for that instrument. So I kind of feel like we have a special place in the pantheon of artists, because that's our instrument, is the voice. And when you do manage to connect it up right, voices are powerful. I mean, Aretha Franklin, and on and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so when you are writing, that's my second question. My next question, not second, it's next, is what is the most important tool when you're creating? Like, is it just a pencil, or do you use like Garage Band or Google Docs? Like, is there a specific thing that you use nowadays for music? Or
I think I'm very old school. I write with pencil, and I try not to erase anything. I try to just put a line through it, because oftentimes you go back and go, oh, that actually didn't suck at all, and I don't know why I thought it did, but if you erase it, it's gone. When I feel like the song is finished, I will transfer it over to my laptop and kind of look at it in print. But sometimes they are finished, but there's always little changes that happen, and it's kind of interesting to look back on lyric sheets and realize how the song has just changed, and you weren't even aware of it, but ands get dropped, the tense of a verb might change, stuff happens. Generally I start with paper and pencil, and it's probably the most physical writing that I ever do in my whole life, because I tend to not write anything anymore. not even checks. Yeah, it's pencil. There's something about that connection. I think part of it is that the physical act of writing with a pencil, not even a pen, but a pencil, is slow. It takes a while, and that's about the right speed for the brain. When I'm trying to write with a laptop, it's too fast. I can't think that quick. So it kind of slows me down, which is right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah. As long as it works, that's all that matters. And then before we jump into you talking a little bit of what you have going on, just one more question, and that's kind of a hard one too. So if the music community could do one thing better, what would it be?
Maybe just explain. I mean, this goes back to the whole Spotify thing. I think that in some ways, I mean, it's the industry has kind of sold everybody a bill of goods about us, that we're, you know, that there's this magical thing, and there is a magical thing involved in being a creator, but really our lives are no different than anybody else's. I mean, if you love what you do, you love what you do. I've met inspired plumbers, and I don't in any way belittle what anybody does. I just don't think that people fully understand, because we've enshrouded ourselves in this kind of magical mystery of being in the arts and being creators. And so now everybody's like, well, I don't know what you guys do, so I have no connection between the fact that I get my music for free, or I pay next to nothing on Spotify. And so I don't think people really understand what we do. And it's not that sexy. It's not that really that interesting. It's the same old. We get up, we create stuff, we get in our cars and drive to work. Sometimes that involves a 9-hour drive to our work, which is, you know, in the next big city where we play a show. But that's the same as everybody else. If people don't start to connect the dots about their consumption of what we create, and the fact that we're actually not getting paid on what we should get as creators for this stuff. I don't mean live work, because that's a separate thing, but to create this stuff, which, let's face it, it's in every elevator, it's in every shoe store, it's like paint. Music is everywhere. Somebody has to create it, and if we don't make that connection financially between paying for it, just like you pay for paint or coffee or shoes or fabric or whatever it is, it'll go away.
Yeah.
And you know, I think there's a certain amount of, I think that we can get away with a certain amount of music that's been created by machines, but at some point people are going to start missing music that has hearts involved, and you can't get that for free. You can't. And as much as musicians love to create music, and we do, we have to get paid for it. And it's not about being rich and famous. It's just about paying for my mortgage, paying for my kid to go to school, paying for my, you know, new tires in the car, like the usual stuff, the same as everybody. So I think we still have a job to do with explaining that to people, so that hopefully they start to get it, that it's actually really valuable to them, and they should start trying to figure out a way to set a little bit of a budget aside for it, because they eat it every day like cereal. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. People don't even notice when they're consuming music, right? Because it's so often and all the time. Like, if we were to, like, you know, you have to pay $1 every time you listen to a song in a day, then they would be aware of
and
how a CD wasn't that much money before.
For sure, for sure, all the arguments that people come up with, how the industry screwed it up, like, all those things are true, but at the end of the day, there is somebody sitting there with a piano or a keyboard or a computer creating something, and it's valuable. It's really valuable to everybody. And the only reason I know that is because every time I walk anywhere, I hear it. So let's figure out how to properly compensate people for it, so that they can keep doing it. That's all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, before we end, please let us know a little bit about what's going on.
Speaking about compensating, Okay, so my latest thing And it's kind of weird because I put this out last year at CD. Every Soul's a Sailor, won a couple of awards for it, still playing music for it, but this came up in a very odd way, and it's a vinyl only release. There is a digital download attached, but as far as Spotify and all of these conversations, this exists entirely outside of that world. This is going so far back in time.
Yeah.
It's not on CD. You won't find it on any streaming thing. You can basically get it from me at a show or at my website, or you might be able to find it at a Riga dealer. Riga is a British turntable manufacturer. Roy Gandy, who started Riga Records way back in the 70s, he approached me and said, basically, did I want to make a record with him? In the most basic old school way you can, which is 2 microphones going directly to tape with no filtering, no processing, nothing. Like straight to tape. And then from that we went straight to vinyl. So it's a very odd record. It's as analog as you can get. In some ways it's as close as you can get to hearing me play 8 songs without showing up and sitting in my front room. It doesn't even sound like me on stage. It sounds like me sitting here because the room that we recorded it in was pretty dry. We added a little tiny bit of reverb. That's the only kind of fairy dust we threw on it. Otherwise, it's just me going through wires straight to tape and straight to vinyl. So that is available through my website, and very limited. I think we've got like 500 copies of it or something. So that's kind of what I'm up to right now.
That's great.
Yeah.
Vinyl does sound completely different.
It does.
Than like if you listen to a vinyl recording in a vinyl, like it's just crazy how different it is.
It does.
Well, there is like a scientific thing to it, right? So.
Oh yeah. Well, and it sounds entirely. I mean, vinyl to CD, but vinyl to MP3, which.
Oh yeah.
My daughter spends her whole life. I'm blown away by how much music my daughter listens to. It's huge. It's everything from SZA to Creedence Clearwater. Like it's really widespread if you listen to her Spotify playlist. But she listens to most of it through earbuds and MP3s, and it's just totally terrifying to me that we can spend all this time tweaking it, and then it gets squished down to an MP3, which is it's like eating junk food for your whole life.
Yeah.
Because the quality of the file is so shitty, and it's so small. So yeah.
And that's it. So
thanks for having
people
me.
didn't catch the live, we will post it again on our Facebook.
Great.
So we will be able to see it anytime. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.